Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage Marketing Professor and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Today, we have Purna Virji, Principal Consultant of Content Solutions at LinkedIn. Having worked at a social media network, a search engine advertising platform, agency side, and in-house at global corporations and startups, and in television as a talk show producer, Purna has a unique, holistic perspective on content marketing only a rare few have. Over the past 2 decades, she has marketed content as a creator, storyteller, program manager, SEO publisher, instructional designer, and brand evangelist. She's now the principal content solutions consultant at LinkedIn and wrote and released a book, High Impact Content Marketing. Today, we're going to be talking about her book, content marketing strategy, and of course, mentorship. Purna, how are you?
Danny, I'm thrilled to be here. Like I said, I am an avid listener of your podcast, and such great advice, and mentorship is such a topic close to my heart. So thank you for having me.
Pleasure. And your name definitely has come up in previous episodes, so it's a big deal that we have you here today.
It's a big deal to be here today.
Awesome. All right, so let's jump right in. Where did you go to school and what did you study?
I went up to high school in India, in Mumbai, where I'm from. So I studied, my first degree is business and economics and finance. And then I'm like, this thing is really not lighting up my bones on fire. And so this isn't my passion. And I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. And so I moved over to the UK and then I studied journalism there. And then I realized I found my calling, because one of the things about me, as you can tell from my diverse career, is that I love to tell stories and I love to teach people, but I also like to touch and learn and work on different things. I don't want to do the same thing for the rest of my life. I'm not one of those people that you'll hire and 10 years later, she'll be in the same job. I want to learn and grow and diversify. And so, so journalism was a great place for me to start.
So we often ask people, when you look back at your college experiences, were there anything that happened inside and outside the classroom that you feel like was impactful in directing your path today?
For me, everything always comes down to the people. So who did I meet? Who did I learn from? What did something that somebody say, spark something in me? I would say one of the biggest lessons that stayed with me from journalism school has been that we had a professor who would say, never forget that what you do has consequences, and there's serious consequences, because sometimes you just think, I'm going to write this thing and put it out there, and it doesn't. It has such a big ripple effect, and paying attention to that, questioning things and looking beyond the story. He had shared 3 different publications coverage of the same event, and you could see how, and he was everything has a bias. Even if you think and this was in the UK, so they're even if you think it's the BBC and it's so neutral, but everybody will report on something from their perspective. And so you have to be really careful to tell a balanced story and be really responsible and ethical. And so that was, I think, I'm so grateful that I learned that from him, because that's been this connective thread that I've tried to infuse in everything that I've done in every job since then.
I love that. And when you talk about journalism, I see a little bit of a passion.
Yeah.
Is there any part of you that misses that, or ooh, I wish I could have, been more in that arena? Now, I know in a way you are a journalist right now, but, I would say more in the true sense of the word.
It was the best job I ever had. I worked in the TV production. It was so much fun and I absolutely loved it. Sadly, the life of a TV producer, you don't know your schedule more than 2 weeks in advance. It's super long hours. And my son was born with a lot of health issues at the time. And so it was just unsustainable for me. And so I moved over to the dark side, which is PR, where they'll be you'll all, he had told us the same. Jeff Manjam, our professor, had been most of you in this room, this was our first day, will be working in PR one day. And we were no, never. We're going to go and cover strife and be the serious journalist. And then I'm of course, 5 years of TV journalism to be okay, I'm going to the dark side. The dark side has better pay and better hours, but it was a little soulless for me. I wasn't drawn to it, but then I discovered digital marketing. And so, the dots always connect when you look back, and it was mentors and people that have come at the right time to sort of shine a different light for me or show me a different path that I may not have seen.
Love it. So talk about mentors. How would you define a mentor?
I would say probably a mentor to me and what I try to be for others, to my mentees, is somebody who can shine a light on your awesomeness or the strengths and traits in you that you don't realize, and it can bring them out of you. They can sort of shortcut your learning and be like, rather than, I'm a graduate of the School of Hard Knocks. So if I can save myself some hard knocks and be like, oh, let me lift you up to where I am. And then also like call you on the constructive, like on the not so good parts as well. Be like, listen, dude, you can't be acting like this. So you can't be doing like this, right? People who will genuinely want to see you grow and thrive and will share their lived experiences and their learnings to help speed up your learnings.
So I know you've had some pretty influential mentors in your life. Rand Fishkin, Will Reynolds, Letitia Boardman.
Yeah.
Would love to talk about them and how they were influential mentors to you.
Oh my gosh. Well, when I first got into digital marketing in the first place, it was what you learned. There was this early 2000s. There's no degree for it at that point. I would read SEO Moz as it was at the time. And like, I just learned a lot from Moz and from Rand and his posts and his generosity and like putting out the knowledge. Just learning from him all the time was such an honor. And then I remember him and then Brad Geddes, who was on the paid search side, right? His book, like Advanced Google AdWords, is still like, I've read that book probably more than I've read any other book, like every edition. It taught me so much. It was these two. And then I would reach out to them because I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so awesome. Like, I want to stalk you into being my friend one day. And not creepy way. I remember bumping into Rand at an event or something. And then long story short, SEO Moz, because they have this whole passion of like giving and elevating others and shining a light on new talent. They did this SEO Moz on the road where they would go to different cities and put on a speaking gig. And so it was with Will Reynolds and Sears. So it was, and Sears offices used to be a converted church. It used to be like a former church building. It used to be called the Search Church. So it was like SEO Moz at the Search Church. And they put out a call for local speakers. And then I wanted to impress my boss at the time. Like I started a new job and he was very much like, be in the industry. I'm like, young and dumb and like whatever. I'm like, yeah. I went and threw my hat in the ring, boss. Like, aren't you impressed? I was thinking I'll never get selected. I got picked. And then it was like, holy crap. Like, what do I do now? Like, this is like horrifying because I have to speak on the same stage as like Will Reynolds and Rand Fishkin and Joanna Load and like all of these amazing people who I've looked up to and learned from. And they provided so much advice and guidance to newbie speakers, and here's how you show up. And it was only 9 minutes, but they made sure I was so comfortable, right? Getting there was so great. They made it a point to tell me all the good that I did up, right? Build your confidence when you're trying something new. And then I had expressed interest that I want to do more of this. Like I really enjoy it. People who spend their privilege, Will and Rand, like have time and time again invited me back to come speak at different events. Well, it was MozCon. They've, given me great career advice. I've gone to them and asked them questions. They'll come and call me on stuff. Like when 2016, I was all about voice search. That was all I was talking about. And Will Reynolds, I remember, is like, what are you talking about? Like, this isn't immediately applicable for most people. Like, you need to connect future to current too. And I'm like, that is such amazing advice because working at Microsoft and you're sitting there with technology that's like, 10 years ahead. And it's so exciting because that's normal. But then he's like, you've got to translate it for people. Like everybody's not sitting there with that ice. And, it's people who teach you, give you your confidence, but then spend their privilege to elevate you and go up. So I'm very, very grateful for all of that they've done. Like even now, if I have a question, if I need help, I remember when my book came out, I was like, would you mind like helping, reshare a post or something like Rand about my book. And he did a whole review video on the first day. And it got so many likes and reactions and comments and engagements. And I got like 20 podcast invitations just from that, right? It's people who spend their privilege to help you. And I'm like, I need to do that for others. And so this is a very long answer. I'll end it with one sentence that stuck in my mind. It was from Will Reynolds. I remember we were sitting there in Dublin after an event that we'd all spoken about. We're in a bar, like having a drink in Dublin. And I remember like Will turned to me and he was like, Purna, if somebody sends the elevator down for you, it is on you to go send the elevator down for somebody else. And I'm like, that is the best advice. And actually followed that advice to the T. And it's something that's very, very deeply meaningful to me today.
And I think what's so cool is, when I look at you, Purna, you're like this rock star, but every rock star has their beginnings, right? And it's so cool that you had those people in your life who like gave you the chance and gave you the input. So when I hear people, especially on the podcast, like, yeah, my mentor is Purna, like it makes so much sense now. Like you had the best teachers and then so for you actually go and give back and help people as well. It's absolutely lovely.
So, Danny, you've been to India. I don't know if you ever heard this term, but it's something called Guru Dakshina, which is like it's sort of like the prize. You give a prize to your teacher, to your guru. So, guru really just means teacher. And I know I hate the whole like marketing guru type thing. Do that. And I'm like, I'm not a rock star. Like, I think I'm just as fallible and panicked and, trying to figure things out like everyone else is. So I always rely on other people. I have this like board of directors in my life who I'll go to for different things where I'm like, I do not know how to effectively present to like my VP. So I'll talk to like my former boss at Leticia Boardman at Microsoft, who is a dear, dear friend and a dear mentor and somebody that I go to for advice where I'm like, I'm feeling really panicked about this. Like, am I looking at the right way? And then she'll be like, you're overthinking it. This is this, right? You go to different people for just some things. So I'm like, how do I sell this to sales? So I have he's a senior director at Microsoft, Mayor Daniel, who's just incredible. And he like, what did they say? The Blarney Stone in Ireland. If you kiss it, like you'll speak really well. And I think Mayor just has that. Like he's just born like that. So I'm like, please teach me your like wonderful ways of like packaging things and getting people excited about it. And so, I believe in this concept of having a board of directors in your life who you go to for different things, and you have to go seek it out. Like sometimes they say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Yes, but you also have to recognize that they are the teacher and then ask for advice and follow their advice, right? The best thing you can do, to go back to my Guru Dakshina, is pay it forward. Like, give the price back to the teacher for the teachings and the value that they've provided you. And it can be different forms. It could be paying it forward as Will wanted me to. It could be showcasing like, listen, I've taken your advice. Like, this is what's been happening. This is the learning. So that's a tip for being a good mentee as well.
Love it. So talking about mentees, who do you mentor now in your current position?
So I have a few different mentors, some within LinkedIn, some within the industry in general. So within LinkedIn, there's a program called Impact In, which is about people from underrepresented backgrounds per se. And like, so elevate them. It's hard enough being a woman in tech. It's hard enough being a woman of color in tech. And so if I've learned lessons along the way, how do you handle being the only sometimes in the room? And like sometimes there's a multiple only, and how can I take away the uncomfortableness for somebody else and show them that actually it's not a big deal? Like maybe in some cases, like, here's how you can show up more confidently and be that. So I'll talk to, at Microsoft, I used to co-lead a mentor ring where we'd have 8 or 10 people across the company and on women in leadership. So I'll try to give back. Like, who do I want to help is people who, if I can be 1 or 2 steps ahead of somebody else and I can, put my hand back and be like, come along with me. Like, I'm also learning this. I don't claim to be any kind of expert or rock star or superstar. Like, what I am is I've learned through hard knocks. I've learned through amazing people, and come along with me. Like, let's go on this journey together. And that's how I approach it. So some people will ask me sometimes, like, how do I have more effective one-on-ones with my manager? Like, I remember one of my mentees, she said, most of my one-on-ones with my manager feel like I come home from school and I'm telling my parents what I did that day. So it's like I'm talking about the week. And so I'm like, okay, how do you make it more strategic? And it's things that I learned from others who were like, oh, you can try to use this PPP framework where you talk about, hey, here's my plans for the week and priorities. Like, are we aligned? Here's the progress from last week that they can, you can just be like, it's here, it's written. And then problems or questions or anything that you want their help to overcome. And then that's such a way to have more structure to the conversation. So things like that, I learned that from somebody else. I implemented it, worked great. So I'm like, I like this, try it.
In the industry, I know you're a mentor to many. Some of these are like friendships, but are there people who actually come up to you and say, hey, Purna, can you be my mentor?
Sometimes it is an official question like that, or sometimes it's just close friendships. And that's what I found. So somebody and we'll both ask each other for advice. And I think that's the funny thing. It's like sometimes there's people who are so humble that they will be like, oh, Purna mentors me. And I'm like, no, you're kidding me. Like, I learned just as much from you. So people like Nava Hopkins, for example, like I love Nava. She's been on your show before. Like, she's so great. And then there's tons and tons of people. Like, I don't know how comfortable people are to be named. Like, that's why I won't. But of course there are. And we're all peers. We're all learning. Like, if something comes easy to me, doesn't mean it'll come easy to you. Or like the things that you do, Danny, that are just so obvious. And you're like, who would pay money for this? And I'm like, no, I would, because I actually don't know this. So come help me. And so find those and ask questions. I think that's also from my journalism background is like, hey, how do you approach it? I'm like, I'm struggling with this. Like, what else could I do? And that seeking out that feedback, good and bad, is really important too.
Yeah, no, these are really amazing ideas and sage advice. I appreciate it. Pivoting to content marketing and your book. So many of the reviews of your book mention how actionable the suggestions are. Many marketing books tend to take a more theoretical approach. What led you to take this approach?
Two things. One was I have a background in learning and development and instructional design. And so I'm like, the whole point of sharing an idea is so that people can actually implement it and act on it. Like I would feel so much joy if when people come to me and be like, oh, the thing you had in this chapter, I tried it and it worked really well. I'm like, that's what I want to see. And I know how I learn or how adults learn in studying is that yes, you get the theory and you get the strategy, but then it's always missing that, okay, so then what's my first step or what's the next thing that I can go do? And that's always been my approach and how I present. So even when I'm keynoting, which is meant to be more high level, I'm always like, 3 things you can do, because I find that I value that a lot. And so that's just my style and I found. So that was the one thing. And the second thing was also, it just goes back to mentoring. And Takia Burt, who is the LinkedIn ads blogs like editor-in-chief, and she, in her review, I think this like made me cry because it was like literally what I wanted to do. And I didn't know anyone realized. She was like, oh, reading this book is like listening to, a kind, warm mentor. And she used the word mentor. I'm like, this is so lovely. Because I'm like, oh, come with me. Like, I feel your pain. I've walked in your shoes. I've been in your position. And let me, come along with me. Like, let's go do this. Let's act on it together. And I'll share exactly what I did it. Because I don't, to quote what's a TikTok, like, I don't gatekeep. There's no gatekeeping here.
But that's amazing because I know that, I haven't written a book, but I can imagine that when you put a book, you want to put your soul into it and you want people to, like, when they read it, to feel you. So to get that testimonial review of exactly what you wanted is just like amazing.
It was so special. And, just people saying that, oh, we tried this, it worked. I'm like, that's all I want to do. I think I found was very authentic to me. And like, I found my life purpose, not to get too sentimental, but during the time, like when my son was born with like very severe health issues. And it was, the first 2 or 3 years were really like touch and go. And it was a really hard time. Like I was so down and miserable and worried. And I tried everything. I stress ate. I tried, talking to people like, what else do you do? And somebody said that, be of service to others. And that's one of the ways that will actually lift you. And that was the only thing that helped made me feel better. I went and like, supported like an animal charity, or like did a lot of stuff there where I went and was of service to others. And that was literally the only thing that I found that helped me. And I'm like, and it felt right. Like it felt like something clicked in my head. Like, this is what I meant to do. And it sounds so cheesy. And I bet like people listening will be like rolling their eyes now at the concept of like purpose. But as cheesy as it sounds, I just found like that was right for me. And I believe that my purpose here is to lift others. And how I can do that is through the power of education and empowerment.
Yeah, I don't think it's cheesy. I think that it's a little counterintuitive. People think that if I'm going out and serving others, that's about helping other people. But people don't realize that when they do that, they actually feel better themselves. So I'm a big believer in that. There's some people in my life who've gone through some tough things, and I see them very active in helping others. And sometimes I ask myself, like, how do they have the strength to do that? Like, they've been through tough, but you can see that by them helping others and going out there, they have that purpose. So I'm a big believer, and that's wonderful that, that's something that helped you as well. So a major factor in successful content marketing is adaptivity. You have to adjust your approach and content with the trends. How do you balance staying true to your message while also keeping up with the Joneses?
I think the biggest thing to do that is being very clear in my goals and the outcomes that I'm trying to drive. And if I know the outcomes I'm trying to drive, I know what my goals are and how I'm going to tie them back to the business. And then the other thing is if I know my audience, because times change, technology changes, how we communicate changes, but people and who we are innately doesn't change. Like human nature is very consistent. And it has been since the time we were Neanderthals, like roaming the planet. And so if you understand the core ways of what makes us as people tick, what motive, who am I targeting? What do they really care about? What would they value? How can I serve them? How can I be of service to my audience? Because ultimately your content is never about you. It's always about your audience. Then it's just, where are they spending their time? How are they preferring to consume that content? And then it's just as easy as taking your timeless, essence of your message, your idea, which is like water. It can take the shape of any container and then putting it in. So whether I put it as a video, or then I'll take the video and just take the audio out of it and do that. Or if I create an image or a long form article, or a social media post, right? It can take any form. And as long as for you, it serves your business goals and I'm clear on what I'm doing and why, and then for whom, it doesn't matter. Like technology can come and go, platforms can come and go. It makes no difference. And we've been in this industry a long time now, Danny. Like we've both seen, it was the era when, it was all about this platform. And then it was like, oh, now this is the next big thing, right? You just have to think about who am I trying to reach? What am I trying to say to them that will move the needle for my business? And where's the best place to reach them? And just focus on a few things and do them really well.
As we described in the intro, you've held positions in just about every corner of marketing, in-house, agency, SEO, PPC content, and more. How do you zoom out from your current position to create a holistic approach, taking into consideration all of your previous experiences?
I think the biggest thing that any of us can do, regardless of how many years we've worked or not, is to find transferable skills and ideas that can work super well from one platform to the other and use it to spot trends. One of the things from working agency side that I miss when I'm in-house is getting to work across multiple different clients, and then you see those trends. So that it's in the same way now that I've worked across different channels in like the last, several years, that I can almost spot tricks. I'm like, okay. So just as we got these, one of my teammates was saying like, oh, there's all these people who don't work at LinkedIn that are giving advice about the LinkedIn algorithms. Like, how do they know stuff? I'm like, it's the same as every SEO is trying to give feedback and advice on how Google's algo works, right? You see these trends across industries. So it's more so, again, if you go back to the people, like, who is it? Am I trying to reach out to like C-suite, like CMOs of Fortune 500 companies? Where do they hang out? Where do they spend their time? Like who is actually in their ear? They're not always the one that are going out there looking for info. I mean, sometimes who influences their decision? Who's doing that? And then it's letting your audience guide you on which platform and knowing where different platforms sort of have a role in the funnel. Like if I'm PPC at this point, people are going out there and searching. They know what they want. If I'm going to use social more so to tell the story and like more often awareness and education tactic. Of course, social will convert as well. I'm not saying it doesn't, but how are you using those channels together to amplify each other? Because we're being siloed for too long. How can I use search and social to be better together? How can I use TV and social to be better together to amplify and create those sort of win-wins amongst different channels?
It's funny that you mention like personas and who you're actually targeting. I feel like for so many people it's obvious, but it's not. Like in my course recently, yesterday, so I give a digital fundamentals course.
Yeah.
One of the students didn't have time to go through all the material. They're most probably going to go into the next cohort. But they said like the one big thing they picked up was personas. Like who are we actually targeting? She's like, in my company, we just market, but we never actually think. And it's funny how like you think like people are actually thinking about who they're targeting, but a lot of people don't. It's crazy.
But then the one thing on personas sometimes is I have an issue with them if they're just like made up. If you're like, oh, marketing Molly does this. And I'm like, who says that? How do you know? Like you made this up in your head. Like that's just you guessing. So it's more so like how I say to find your ideal customer profile. If you have an existing business, is look at who are the cream of the crop. Like who's your top 20% customers that if you're like, oh, if I had, 20 more people like this, like I would be set. And what's unique to them? What are their characteristics? Like what type of position are they? What business? Like what do they do that's different? And then try to understand their pains and their motivations. That's how you'll appeal to people like them. You don't want your like bottom 20% who are just those like problem, the ones that will keep churning and no matter what you do. So then, yeah, study who you have and who's doing really well and find traits they have in common. And that will be very helpful.
So bottom line, don't go to ChatGPT and just get a persona for marketing Molly. You actually have to go and see who your customers are.
That's my personal recommendation. People can certainly do what they like, but I would say you'd be, in my experience, you'll have a little bit more success if you study your customers.
So there are a few different case studies featuring different brands in the book. Are there any examples or case studies that didn't make the final version that you still find interesting and noteworthy?
Well, yeah, there was some stuff about like Nike. I found it so interesting how they pivoted from being like those big basketball stars and everything and there to then taking this very sort of diversity, inclusion, and belonging type approach where it became so personal. It was less about the shoes and how cool we are and all of that, not the Jordans and all of that. It was because the younger generation is so interesting. They were losing coolness, or sort of they were not so much of a desirable brand for the younger audiences because those younger audiences hadn't grown up watching those sports stars play. And so for them, they were like, how do we, if we want to be in business for a long time, then we've got to evolve and keep up with our emerging audiences. And so they just took that whole approach and so see how they shifted. I mean, they've got such incredible moving commercials that every time a new one comes out, we all share it on social media, like, look at this. So I would say that was a really interesting one about understanding and keeping up and pivoting with different audiences. There was a really good one from Microsoft. And then I was like, no, am I putting too much Microsoft in because I'm a former Microsoftie? And so there was just Xbox. Like I have a chapter on accessibility in my book. And there was this amazing story about how they made the adaptive controller for the Xbox. But the cool part was it wasn't just the controller. One of the moms of a child who, in their focus group, they were studying people with those different conditions that they were trying to help overcome. And so it was one of the moms in the group that said, well, what about the packaging? And packaging today, those clamshells, even to buy a pair of scissors, you need a pair of scissors to open up the packaging that your scissors come in. And so there was such a good point. And they were like, oh my gosh, it's not just about the accessible controller. We've got to make the packaging accessible. And there was just such incredible stories about that I think my publisher had said we want 80,000 words. I wrote, it's 108,000 words at the moment in my book. And so I had to cut something. I had to make some hard choices to cut things out. But yeah, those were two examples that I thought was so compelling and just goes into like, go beyond surface level thinking. Like the surface level is great, but everyone's there on the surface. If you can just go 2-3 levels deeper, no one else is there. You just set yourself apart and it's just much more meaningful change.
So imagine a startup company for a consumer good, let's say men's casual wear. Mm-hmm. What's the first misstep you'd caution them to avoid when it comes to creating their initial content strategy?
The first misstep with the content is trying to be like everybody else. I think the most, even in my work at LinkedIn, if I'm like working with different customers, advertisers, so on, they'll be like, well, I do XYZ. Tell me about all the other people who do XYZ and tell me exactly what they do, because then that's what we should do. And I'm like, that is not what you should be doing. Because if you're talking about ChatGPT and like there's 8,000 other articles about top prompts for ChatGPT, then buddy, like you're not going to stand out if you do the same. So one is like, look at what's a different angle. Like what's something that your audience is not being served with? What's an unmet or inadequately met need in the market? Or what's your sort of angle or pivot that you can come in that's different? So think about chocolate, right? Tony's Chocolonely, when they came out, like one of the things that they talked about was not wanting to, being very adamant about not supporting like the child labor that goes into the chocolate manufacturing processes. And in that way, they help sort of stand out from a very broad market. So then if you're a clothing company, like what's different? Like, are you sustainable? Tom's shoes, when he came out, he's like, I'll give away a pair for everyone. It was just, what's the attention grabber? And sometimes it just doesn't have to be, it just can be like the quality or like, we don't this is such high quality. We don't even need to talk about it, but here's what it is. Like there's a different angles that I would think about. So I would start by who's most popular and look at your audience. What are they hearing? And then who are other tangentially related industries that speak to the same audience? Like maybe you are just clothing. Who's a shoe company that does that? Who's a men's like perfume company, or who's a car company that speaks to those kind of audiences? How are they doing it? How are they talking to your audience in a way that it's resonating well? And what can you learn? So that's probably where I would start is let's see what we do not want to do. Let's see what's authentic to us as a brand. Like what's our core brand values, our brand purpose, and like find the connective tissue between what's important to you and what's meaningful for your audience, and see if you can connect that.
Now imagine that same clothing store is 5 years into its business. They've built out a solid content library on their website and they have a comfortable customer base. How would you then advise them to adjust their content approach as a more mature brand?
There are so many different ways I could go with that. I think the first thing I would want to do is look at and sort of like look back, what's been working, what's not working, find what they are feeling like. Is it a genuine issue? Like, do you just need to change because you're bored of it? And this is a big issue with marketers today. Like we get bored and fed up with our content way before the market ever does. And so I would see this all the time. When I was at Microsoft, like, oh, it's a rebrand. Things aren't going that well. Let's rebrand. Here's our brand new colors, brand new logo. I'm like, why? You're the brand marketer. You just checked a lovely, you showed I did work. Change happened, but did it connect with the audience? Like, did it resonate? And so that's what I would try to figure out is what's working, what's not working. What are the audience thinking? Like, what are the pain points? Then we go back and look at some of the, the reviews, look at the customer service things. Like, what's the root issue that may be blocking further growth, or what may be like nuggets of gold that are just hidden that you've got to mine out and do that. So that's what I would start. Like, I wouldn't have a clear direction on where to go beyond. Let's pause for a moment and take a strategic analytical look so that anything that we can create or try to test out is very like deliberate and thoughtfully approached.
In the book, you talk about ROTS, return on time spent. There's also a lot of discussion about scaling. Talk to us about spending time on strategy and content creation and how to know when to put the paintbrush down, something many creatives struggle with.
Oh yeah, me too. I will sometimes want to edit things and then just like knowing the good enough, right? So return on time spent and scaling. So this is something that's really near and dear to my heart. In fact, that's something that I've been doing for the last 3 years at LinkedIn. Was like I built a small program for a small segment of customers, which got so successful. Then they were like, okay, we tried a larger subset. And now it's like global and it is across 5 different teams within my entire org and across all our segments. And so how do you, scale is all about like profitable repeatability. Like what are motions that we can repeat, that are structured, that are proven to work, that balance effectiveness and efficiency. And doing that, the biggest thing you should do where you should not scrimp on time. And if I had to say like I used to read, what was it, like Marie Claire, which had like a splurge versus save. And I was comparing like outfits and like what you should splurge on and what you should save on. So like, let's apply that concept to time. Splurge your time before content creation. Learn as much as you can about what moves the needle for you. Talk to sales, read online reviews, look at your competitors, see what different angle you can take to stand out, right? Understand your customers, talk to your best customers, talk to people that churned or people that just never chose you because you can understand like, why did they not want to choose you? Right? There's so much awesome stuff that you can find out. So invest that time. It's like literally like if I was going to put money into my retirement account today, I'm not going to have expectations to withdraw it next week. Like I know it's going to build up. And it's the same way with your research. Put in the time, put in if it takes 2 weeks, if it takes 3 weeks, even if it takes a month, it's a time well spent. I mean, it shouldn't take a month, but even if you dedicated a full week to this, you'll be miles ahead of anyone else. And then your content will almost write itself. Like you know with full confidence that I think I need to do this on LinkedIn or I need to do this on Instagram because this is what's going to work best for me. This is where they are. I can take this and then see what you can repurpose in different ways. Because another thing about instructional design is that not everyone, even though they hear your message, it may not always go into, you've got to repeat things way more for things to stick. It's okay to repeat your own content 4 or 5 times. And I love to use an analogy that if you go to a wedding and and the Macarena comes on, which is now a really old song, probably chances are you're going to be like, I'm excited. I'm going to dance to this because it's a great song, right? Hit content can work time and time again. So if you've got your greatest hits, reuse them, update them, refresh them. Don't feel bad or don't think you always have to be repeating content. Like give you, save your time there by taking these like well-researched, ideated concepts and then just using them more. Get more use out of what matters. I compare it to fast fashion in the book versus sometimes like in India, my grandmother's saris were passed down. Like I have them and it was a badge of honor to have like, oh, I've got this sari, which is like 3 generations old. It's heirloom. It's treated very carefully. You pass it on. Whereas if I'm buying something off like a Shein or, one of those fast fashion type places, the expectation is like wear it once and toss it, but you don't want to treat your content like that. You want to treat your content like those heirloom clothing that you're going to pass down.
I know for some people, repurposing existing content's difficult. What are some steps for approaching that?
Don't give up on it too soon. Like, let's say you put out some content. Maybe it didn't do that well. Maybe it wasn't a different format. Maybe it wasn't the right timing. Maybe it wasn't the right platform. If you know you're onto a good idea, which your research will tell you, then you're like, I'm onto something. It just needs to be repositioned. So can you come at it differently? Can you try it in a video? Can you try it in a podcast? So you can try changing the format. You can also, if you know you have a good idea, and let's say you're B2B, for example, there's multiple people involved, right? The decision maker isn't just the one that signs the contract. There's a whole buying committee. Can I create this content for different sort of role types of people? Like this is the CEO. He needs this type of info. Whereas, here's the end user who will need more tactical implementation advice. How do I take that one idea and scale it up or down? Another one, you could take the same ideas. Can you come at it from different levels of awareness? This is one of my favorite concepts that I've written about in the book. It comes originally from Eugene Schwartz, and it's the 5 stages of awareness, and he applies it to advertising. And like we could repurpose it for content marketing, where if I was explaining what I did to a 10-year-old versus a fellow marketer, like I would talk about it very differently because people's levels of interest and awareness would be very different. I'd want to find how do I make it relatable to them, meet them where they're at. Same thing with your content. You could have the highest, fanciest AI solution, but if you're going to talk about it to like, hey, nonprofits, here's all the things that this LLM and this acronym and this jargon and everything can do, you've lost them. You've overestimated their level of awareness or interest. But if you're like, hey, nonprofits, like here's why you need to be paying attention to AI solutions and what it can do for you, that's like really higher level. They'll be like, oh, I never even knew that it would apply to me in this sector versus, something that's more human interest. Microsoft does this really well where they're like, oh, on one of their blogs, they have this article about here's how our product managers, the people who built the AI products, are using it to enhance their creativity and productivity. And I'm like, oh, that's super cool. Like they built it. No one knows the tool better than them. I want to see how they're using it. So it's again, you're now meeting people at their level of awareness and interest, but ultimately what is it doing? It's trying to promote their AI tools, but they're just doing it in a different way. So again, your idea is the same. What do you call it? Like a little black dress. You could dress it up for daytime or you could add heels and go out at the nighttime. And so treat your content like that.
I love that visual. All right. Well, it's time for our lightning round. So we'll talk about 3 things. It's not going to be super lightning because I want to hear a little bit of depth, but we're going to talk about traveling, gardening, and cooking. So love to know, number 1, where's your best place that you've traveled to or where you like to travel to?
Oh, so many. I've been so lucky in my job that has taken me all over the world. I would say there's 3 best places that I really, really love. One was Peru, to get to go to Lima. And then, of course, I had to go to Machu Picchu. Like, you can't go to Peru and not. I think it was super gorgeous. The people were just so lovely and kind and warm. So that was a big thing. And so much to see in history and like that energy. I think you and I were talking about just energy of different places, and especially the Sacred Valley in Peru, like just the energy there is so powerful and healing. Another place I'd been to was Slovenia, where I loved it. It was so beautiful. I did a conference there in Portugal. But then the place that I keep going back to is like Italy, because I find like Italy is just good for the soul. And no matter however many times I go, I love that. And then, of course, home to India to just eat all the food and see all the friends and family who I grew up with.
All right. What about gardening? What do you like about gardening?
Oh, it's so rewarding. Like I absolutely love. So I grow vegetables, and then in the summers I have my little like potager or my little veggie garden, the kitchen garden. You just forget about everything else. You're in the moment. You're tending to plants and veggies and watching them grow. It's like my happy space. Like so much of work, I have to be so like type A and driven and get things done. And then I go back and then I can just return and almost like return back and like realize what's important in life. Because sometimes like it's so easy to magnify some of the silly little, in the grand scheme of things, silly little challenges at work. I'm like, oh my gosh, this content isn't perfect. I'm like, listen, who gives a crap? Like, this will not matter 5 years from now. And like sometimes it's just returning back to myself and grounding myself into what matters is what gardening is. And so just pulling those weeds, it's a repetitive, calming task. Watching the plants grow, seeing the joy of the first green tomato, and then, cooking from stuff in the garden and challenging myself to come up with, I've got like 20 poblano peppers all ripe. Like, what the heck am I going to do? And then coming up with a new recipe or ideating is always exciting.
Oh, I love it. Now moving to cooking, what's your favorite dish to cook?
So many. So my husband is Albanian, which is the tiny country in the middle of Italy and Greece, for those who might not know. And so he spent a lot of his life in Italy and Greece. So we cook a lot of Greek food, a lot of Italian food, and a lot of Indian food. So I think for me, if I had to say the favorite dish, is not really quite a dish, but it is my morning routine of my masala chai that I make every morning, where I will I have a little mortar and pestle, and I'll like pound the ginger, and I'll take the little cinnamon and the cloves and the cardamom. And it's my little routine in the morning that suits me to get my cup of chai. And then it's just home comfort to start off my day on a good note.
That sounds so good. I'm going to have to get that recipe.
Oh, yeah. I'll share it with you. It's like my grandmom's recipe. So one of those ones that I've cherished for years.
Yeah, I'm a big tea drinker, so that's lovely. So Purna, what are you currently working on, and what is your next big project?
I just did a pilot where I took this big customer education program. So this is something called Innovate with LinkedIn, which is the customer science org. So I sit within the customer science org, which has like 5 different orgs under one bigger org. And so I tried to pilot taking Innovate with LinkedIn just from like my team, but now covering like 5 different teams. So whether it's the insights team, whether it's a measurement team, whether people come at advertising and marketing at a different angle, how can I take all of their different perspectives and weave together very holistic stories and do that at scale globally across customers from all our different sort of sales segments? So think about customers who maybe are smaller solopreneurship versus also a customer that's a giant like Fortune 50 company. How do I help marketers from all of these different walks of life be more effective both on and beyond LinkedIn? So that's been my I love it because I get to work with the coolest people ever, like the team that works on this project, on the program with me, like the ones that I'm so proud of them. Like they're just incredible humans who come up with amazing ideas. And so, yeah, the more is like, my big thing is like, how can I make sure that they feel very set up for success? How do they feel how valued they are? How do they feel empowered to, work in new ways? Some of them have never worked with another team, let alone work globally. And so how do I build meaningful experiences for them, my team first? And then it is, of course, for our customers as well. Adding value, lifting others. That's what I can do. So I love it. I get to empower customers through education.
So where can listeners learn more about and follow you?
LinkedIn, of course. I'm pretty active there all the time, not just because I work there. I genuinely love the platform. Or I'm on Twitter, or Twix, as people are calling it now, like Twitter X. So you can find me on either.
Well, Purna, this episode was like a cup of masala chai. It was so rich. It was so wonderful. I feel like I went through a university class, and I love that. That's, for me, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today and being a guest on the Digital Marketing Mentor. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Marketing Mentor. We'll speak with you next time.
Thanks for having me, Danny.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.